If you clicked on this video, you might be thinking about moving to Auburn, Washington, and before you do, I have a couple pros and cons for you. I'm Larissa Butler. I'm a local Washington realtor, and I lived in Auburn for about 5 years. It's where I purchased my first home, and I have a couple tips for you before you buy in that city. The first thing I want to start out with is a pros list, and then I'm going to dive into a couple things that you definitely need to think about before you buy in Auburn, so stay tuned for that as well. The first pro on my list with Auburn is the proximity to just about everything. You have access to freeways, you have access to the college, you have access to suburb shopping as well as a mall. There is just so much available to you all within like a 10 to 15 minute radius. So it makes walking around town and shopping in that way or driving to entertainment really, really easy. It was one of the things that I loved most about Auburn is that everything was just so easy to get to and it was really quick to get to everything. Another major pro for Auburn is the proximity to Seattle combined with the housing prices in that area. Auburn, Washington has lower house prices than a lot of other properties with the proximity to Seattle that it has. And you might be surprised to see some of the pricing in Auburn is a lot better than other areas. I have a list of properties below that are in Auburn if you want to take a look at some of that current pricing in the area. But that is another huge pro that it has going for it. It just tends to have lower home prices and still have all the benefits and be within proximity to just about everything. So it's a nice little sweet spot for people looking to commute or maybe looking for just a break on the price. Okay, and then an additional thing on my list for Auburn, Washington, in addition to the proximity to everything, you also have access to tons of different types of entertainment. So there's the casino right up the road or the amphitheater, both of which have concerts and plenty of entertainment. You're less than an hour away from skiing or snowboarding, and there's just so much you're able to do in such a close area, not to mention the fact that you have the mall downtown, but then you also have a couple other malls all within proximity as well. So Auburn, in my opinion, has a couple things going for it on the pro list. It's got proximity to just about everything, pricing that is amazing for houses and condos, and it's got entertainment all nearby. It wins on all those aspects, and it's an area that I highly, highly recommend for both first-time home buyers and move-up buyers. Now on to my cons list. I lived in Auburn for long enough to know that there's a couple things that you can't really see on the surface that is super important to be aware of. The first thing is that Auburn covers a really wide range of areas. I have another video about Auburn and kind of the different types of suburb communities that it has within it because there's really a couple main parts of it. One thing that you're not necessarily seeing is that school ratings and crime ratings go across all of those areas, and not always can you pinpoint each individual section. So when you're doing your research about Auburn, it is really important that the streets and the areas you're looking in are the schools and the crime ratings that you're looking at, because they do change quite dramatically. I've heard people who are so nervous about Auburn, Washington, they never want to go there because they're looking at the crime ratings and the school ratings of downtown. But what they're completely missing is a section like Lakeland Hills, which feels very suburban, has really high school ratings, and has really low crime ratings. So it's important that you're looking at all of that. And I will add it to the con list because there's areas of Auburn that are a little bit nerve-wracking. You definitely want to do your research around. Another con I have on the list for Auburn is that some of the homes there are quite old and need a lot of maintenance. Our home that we purchased was built in the 50s, and while it was beautifully done, there were definitely things that needed to continue to be worked on with that property that cost a lot of money and were just kind of outside the scope of what we felt comfortable with doing. Now, not all of Auburn is like this. There are homes that are newly built in the 2020s and homes that are older in the 1920s. And so you really just have to kind of look at that range and see what the type of property is that you're going for, what type of property you're wanting. And I will put it in a con list only because if you're not careful, you can end up with a really, really old home that needs a lot of work and needs a lot of maintenance. All right, the last thing on my cons list is because Auburn covers such a big geographical region, it goes from the valley up to the hillside and down through the valley into the plateau. It is super important to know that Auburn is not necessarily the best on those few days that it snows. So if you are the type that like to drive around in the snow, great, you're gonna have no problem at all. But just something to be aware of, there are a lot of hills, there are a lot of trees, there is definitely opportunity to have issues when there is snow on the ground. Of course, we know in Washington State that's maybe only a couple weeks out of the year, but super important to keep in mind. And I do have it on the con list just because It can be really scary if you're not familiar with it, and most people in Washington aren't used to driving in the snow. I'm curious if you've lived in Auburn, what are some of your favorite things about the city, and maybe some things that you wish you would have known before you moved in. Leave those in the comments. And if you have questions about real estate in Auburn, Washington, or other parts of Washington, feel free to check out the resources I have below or send me a message directly. I would love to be your resource for all things Washington real estate.